Welcome to Open Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Stidham. This is a weekly podcast about faith, Christianity, and general questions that come along with religion. This is episode 2, where we will essentially start from the very beginning of what is the Bible. Growing up, I never really attended church regularly, so I missed just about all of the Sunday school teachings and little cartoons that taught me the foundations. Every time my family would move, someone in the community would come by and ask us if we wanted to go to the local church. And we would occasionally go, but it wasn't really until my later years in high school and very early college time that some of my friends started getting me involved in church on a regular basis. At that point, though, I felt like I was missing those foundations, and I still can't recite the books of the Bible. I probably don't even know half of them. So in church, I would listen and pick up the intended effect of the sermon, but I never grasped the way that it tied into the other sections of the Bible. And after posting my first episode on Easter, I was telling my wife how Moses was actually meant to be drowned and was rescued and became a part of the royal family. And she was saying how that was something that was essentially taught in the little cartoons and things in Sunday school. And that was something that I found interesting that I didn't know. So to me, that just plays into why I'm doing this podcast. Now, I would have felt stupid or, I don't know what the correct word would be there, less faithful, less understanding at, the later point in my life discussing that minor detail as an adult in church. I've never known how things connect, how each section of the Bible came about, who said what, why did they say it. So minus the timing of the first episode just because it was right at Easter, I think the best place to start is, what is the Bible? The Old Testament was written over roughly a 1,000-year period by Israelite prophets, which were scholars and poets, basically just really good writers in the Hebrew language. The earliest known mention of Israel was found by archaeologists in ancient Egyptian writing from the 13th century BC. And the earliest known mention of the Jewish God, Yahweh, or the word that's used for the Jewish God, was an inscription relating to the king of Moab from the 9th century BC. So I'd like to throw in a quick side note or little caveat here. One way that I try and understand religion and faith is by looking at scientific evidence. So, archaeologists, paleontologists, historians, things of that nature. I think that there are extremes on both sides where people follow in a purely blind faith, taking the Bible in a word-for-word, literal sense without question. And then people who will not even consider faith and spend their time shooting all religion down using scientific reasoning. And if either of those are you, that's okay. I mean no judgment by that. All I'm saying is, as I search out my religious footing and hopefully help others along the way, the combination of the two is where I try to stay. So with that being said, it is speculated that the word Yahweh, now key here is the word, not the actual God, but the word that is the name of the god, was possibly adapted from the mountain god YHWH in ancient Seir or Edom. I believe that Seir is referring to Mount Seir, which is a region stretching between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. And Edom, maybe Edom, refers to a kingdom based in the territory to the south and east of the Dead Sea. So, somewhere around the Dead Sea, basically. When all of those books were combined, they made up the Tanakh, which is the Jewish Bible. And Tanakh is actually an acronym. It's the Torah, which is law. So think Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. And then, so let me backtrack a bit. Tanakh is T-A-N-A-K. The T-A is the Torah. The N-A stands for Nevi'im, which is the prophets like Joshua, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah. And then the K is Ketuvim, which is the writings. So think Psalms, Proverbs, Job. So it's split into 3 sections: the law, prophets, and the writings. During the time of Josiah, in the 6th century BC, the books of Deuteronomy and Judges were compiled and added to the other writings, according to the historians that I found. During this period, though, several other texts were written that were not included in the Tanakh. These texts include Maccabees, Tobit, Judith, Wisdom, Sirach, etc. Once all those books were combined, they told the story of the Israelites and the works and promises that God had done and made for the people. Within this was the hope for a new great leader that would come and create a new peace, or a new world order. This is what we now know as Christians as the Old Testament. And this new leader is what Christians consider to be the prophecy of the Messiah, or Jesus. So, after Alexander the Great's conquest, the Tanakh was translated into Greek, which is known as the Septuagint. This was the Bible that was used by the early Christians in Rome. So how did we get the New Testament? Well, Jesus of Nazareth comes along as a prophet, or the Son of God, to move this story of the Old Testament forward. So essentially the Tanakh was written up to a point and just stopped. And then Jesus of Nazareth comes along and says, hey, this thing that you've been waiting for, this prophecy of a new leader, of a new Messiah, well, that's me. I'm the Son of God, and here's what I bring. These are the teachings. These are the ways you should live your life. And essentially, you can only get to God through me, for I am the Son, the way. And so that is essentially how he picks up the Tanakh and moves it forward with what is now the New Testament. So during his time, he had followers called the apostles. These apostles wrote stories and became the books of the New Testament, which are the Gospels and Acts. So at this point, we have the Old Testament, the other books, and the New Testament. One area of writing of this New Testament that has always troubled me has been who actually wrote the Gospels and where did they get the stories from. From what I found, the earliest of the Gospels and the stories that make them up originate from the letters of Paul. Around 50 AD, churches would circulate Paul's letters, and scribes would copy the letters and recirculate them. As these scribes copied down the letters, they would compile them into books. And so each time a church would get in a letter, they would copy it down, and they'd add it to their book, and they'd send that letter on to the next church, to the next town, to whoever's going to get it next in circulation. Once the churches got the books of Paul's letters put together, they actually began to write and circulate their own letters. They were just inspired by Paul's letters and teachings. So they wouldn't have actually been written by Paul, but inspired by his writings. I saw this thing where some historians and theologians and academics and things like that say that a portion of Paul's letters, even though they're accredited to him as being written by him, appear to have been written by the churches, just inspired by him. Now, how they know that, I'm not entirely sure. I guess it could be like a slightly different writing style, or he said, she said, oral record type thing. I'm not entirely sure how they know that, but it's a theory they have of some of the letters of Paul. And so over time, churches would pass on oral stories as well as the letters of Paul about Jesus, which is what forms the foundation of the Gospels. Some historians say that there was an original document known as Source Q, which was adapted into the Gospels. Historically, or factually speaking, whichever would be the better word choice there, from what I have found, the Gospels were actually published anonymously, but they were given the names of the disciples because a direct link to Jesus would give them more credit or divine authority. Because you got to think, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, like the apostles, they were alive and following Jesus and writing down his teachings and learning his teachings far beyond, or not beyond, but before the Gospels were written. The Gospels, or the New Testament, it was written, put into a book form, and passed forward way later than the lives of the apostles. And so I have heard several times, both from critics and from a professor I had, who I think he had a PhD in religion. I always called him Dr. Reverend. It was kind of an inside joke between him. I was like, do I call you doctor? Do I call you Reverend? Because he was a practicing Reverend at the time as well. But they told me that, the Gospels, their timelines and their stories contradict each other in both the birth and the resurrection of Jesus. They don't say that they didn't happen. It's just exactly how they happened, when they happened, how long it took, things like that. They vary between the different Gospels. But my thought on this is that given the fact that the books were not actually written and published by the disciples, I would say the differences would have probably just come from the personal, political, and religious agenda of the individuals that published them. Throughout history, we can see that those two things, political and religious agendas, are huge driving factors behind how things are decided, how things are retold, how they're written down, how they're passed on. Those two things drive a lot of decisions and things that are done within humanity. So for me, that's a way to explain the differences. Another area of the Bible that I have never really understood or found the balance of literal or not is the final book of Revelation, which is the apocalyptic writing that talks about the final prophecy. I think the reason I struggle with this so much is the extremism that I have seen among the different denominations. I found an interesting theory about this book, though, where several scholars believe it is less about a prophecy and more a response to the Roman destruction of the Great Temple in Jerusalem. I personally think that, in a religious writing like this, a lot of the word usage and language is more symbolic, figurative, and metaphorical. That doesn't mean that it's not true. I think that there is a deeper meaning that is supposed to come from this book. The meaning that, hey, life is not perpetual. It's not going to continue on. This world is not going to continue rolling the same way it has been. And essentially, like, if you want to get into heaven, if you want to be saved when you die, when the world ends at whatever point it does end, then you need to be looking to Jesus. You need to be looking to the Savior. I think that that's kind of the idea that book is getting across, but I don't think that a lot of the words are word for word literal sense. But the deeper meaning of the second coming and end times is something that I don't fully understand, and I'm not sure that I will in this research that I've done today. But as Christianity moved forward, different groups added and removed books based on their particular desires for learning and teaching. The Catholics kept the Old Testament, called the other books the Deuterocanonicals, and kept the New Testament. Other more Orthodox churches took the Catholic combination and added more of the Old Temple books, or as I've been calling them, the other books. During the Protestant Reformation, though, the other books were removed and they accepted only the Old and New Testaments. So the Protestant movement is essentially the split from the Catholic Church. The Protestants are what a vast majority of us know as the different denominations. So Baptist, Methodist, Church of God, Church of Christ, those are, in my understanding, a descendant or a smaller group of a Protestant group. It's essentially a follower of like a Western Christian church, separate from the Roman Catholic Church. And so the Protestants came in and they were like, well, we don't want those other books in our Bible. So we're going to teach just the Old Testament and just the New Testament. And so that is what makes up the modern Bible that many of us know. But now we have so many different versions of the Protestant Bible. But why? Well, the most obviously known and widely used version is the King James Version. So this book was originally printed in 1611 and was commissioned by King James I after the Puritans and the Calvinists demanded church reform and restructuring of the clerical hierarchy. King James held a conference at Hampton Court Palace, where it was decided that a new translation of the Bible should be written, since it was widely believed that the earlier versions were corrupted by the ruling monarchs. From what I could tell, one of the big reasons for the many different translations is for two main reasons. First, the evolution of English language and culture, and secondly, the number of manuscripts that are available for translation. I found that there are over 5,800 Greek New Testament manuscripts, over 10,000 Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts, and over 19,000 copies in Syriac, Coptic, Latin, and Aramaic languages. So along with the King James Version, though, the more known ones are the New International Version, New Living Translation, New American Standard Bible, New Revised Standard Version, and the New Jerusalem Bible. So is one right and the others are not? I don't think so. From what I can tell, it appears to just be how they are written and read. For example, in the King James Version, Job 36:33, the noise thereof showeth concerning it, the cattle also concerning the vapor. But the same passage in the New International Version, his thunder announces the coming storm, even the cattle make known its approach. I think that's just more of a linguistic styling thing. Back when the King James Version was written, that was probably how they read things and how they spoke. But, at least for me, when I'm trying to really learn about Christianity and the Bible, it's hard to combine not knowing anything about the vast majority of Christianity with also trying to read what I think is Old English. And so for me, I prefer the more modern written versions of it, but there are people who prefer the King James Version because they say it's more historically accurate to I guess, the time it was written. But yeah, that's fine. I think it's just more of an opinion of how you read things. So with all of these books now put together, translated over and over again, and what does the Bible actually say? What story comes out of the thousands of years, different rulers and their translations? What about the texts that have been found by archaeologists in recent years? Well, tune in for the next episode of Open Faith, and I will try to answer those things, because right now I have no idea. I decided to explore my faith and religion, and try and find my footing in Christianity and my faith and my beliefs. And I wanted to share that journey with you all in hopes for some guidance from anyone listening, Christian or not. Again, I want this to be an interfaith thing. If you're an atheist, if you're a person that is purely scientific, what's your opinion on it? If you are a very traditional Christian, what's your opinion on it? If you're a pastor, if you're a Muslim, I think that the common ground and the open discussion between all those groups is good. I think it helps break down the barriers. And so I'm sharing, my spiritual and religious journey and finding myself in hopes that not only can I get guidance from other people, but maybe it'll help others who are in a similar faith journey as I am. So thank you all for listening. Look up Open Faith Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Like and follow, and you will see when the next episodes come out.